Is it live? Is it on? Greetings, viewers. Eric the Car Guy here, back again with another live show for you where I answer your automotive questions from the Google Plus page. Speaking of which, if you are watching this on YouTube, I cannot see those questions, so I will not be answering any of the questions that are posted to this YouTube video. Apologies for that in advance. I will, however, be taking the questions from the live Google Plus event, as I mentioned. I will also mention that I sometimes mess up people's names, and I apologize for that in advance. I do these shows every other week, and the next show will be on March 4th. So if I don't get to your questions today, you can. I will be back once again on March 4th to do that. But in the interim, there is always EricTheCarGuy.com there for you 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. At least that's the hope. But anyway, there's tons of things there to help you. And lastly, I always post additional information down in the description of this video. So if you're looking for something I might have referred to during the video, please check the description. Also, there will be additional information and links to other articles and things that could possibly help you with your own automotive issues if I don't get to your questions today. So I want to get moving along. I want to get to the actual questions here. Oh, we can, real quick. I really like my shirt. Yeah, I really think they got it together to, got what it takes to pull this galaxy together. Anyway, starting with questions, we have Michael Bringle. Does a PCV rely on crankcase pressure alone, or does it also require the intake vacuum? The reason I ask is I've traced an oil leak to the dipstick, which obviously indicates excessive blow-by. However, the car ran for around a month with a split pipe between the map sensor and the intake. Okay, Michael, yes, the intake vacuum is important, and the PCV valve helps regulate that intake vacuum. It creates sort of a negative pressure inside the engine and the crankcase itself. The reason for this is because anytime you have moving components inside an enclosed space, such as pistons moving up and down, crankshaft spinning, that type of thing, pressure is created. So you have to relieve that pressure. The PCV system has two sides to it. It has the intake side that uses intake vacuum to help draw some of the pressure out, but also, once again, to create that negative pressure inside the crankcase. But it also has a fresh air side so that it can draw in fresh air from the crankcase. Before PCV valves, they actually just ran a tube out the back of the engine down on the road. It used to create a nice oil slick right down the middle of the road. It was called an oil draft tube. But actually, another interesting fact, the reason why they invented the PCV valve is because they wanted to drive Jeeps underwater in World War II. So they couldn't have an open tube leading out the back of the engine, or else water could get in. So to create a closed system, they came up with a PCV system, which was pretty clever. But you do need that vacuum. And as far as in situations like yours, where you suspect a situation where you have excessive blow-by, you might want to check the operation of the PCV valve, because if it's not creating that negative pressure, that pressure will build up inside the crankshaft due to all those rotating assemblies and everything I mentioned, and possibly cause other leaks. So one of the first and easiest places to go when you have oil leaks like this is to the PCV system. So I would check it out, make sure the valve is working properly, and go from there. Jeremy Fountain, how you doing, Jeremy? My friend from Dallas. Hey, Eric, I recently had to bring my truck to the shop for some anti-theft junk that went ape. While I was there, they did some updates to the PCM. Ever since, I've noticed I've gotten better fuel mileage, yet less seat-of-the-pants power. Not complaining, just wondered if you've ever messed around with PCM parameters and was able to get more fuel mileage or horsepower. Absolutely. That's the thing about fuel-injected cars. A lot of people have been advocating that I take my Fairmont and go fuel injection with it. And one of the reasons I'm not doing that is because carburetors don't rely on a fuel map. Fuel injection systems do. And you can change those parameters just like you've experienced there. In fact, one of the things that I've experienced with this in my tenure at Acura was I changed a lot of transmissions in 99 through 03 Acura TLs. And after the transmission change, what we also did was we replaced the PCM at the same time. In doing so, customers would come back and say similar things to what you have here, to where they might be getting, well, the transmission wouldn't shift the same, and it didn't seem to have the same power. In fact, the old ECU was better, but unfortunately what it did was it changed the shift points, maybe held them longer or something like that. And whatever it was, it changed the way everything acted. So it's not just your fuel injection system. It also may change, depending upon how your truck is set up. It also may change shift points. It also may change some other things. Everything is a parameter with a fuel injection system. So, and it can all be programmed and sometimes altered. It just depends on the manufacturer and your access to those fuel maps and those shift points and all those other kinds of things in there. Dealers sometimes have access to this and they can reflash something, which it sounds like was what they did for your truck. But other times there's aftermarket ECUs and the tuners are big into this, and they basically sit there with a laptop and dial in fuel mixture and ship points or whatever parameters are programmable that they can alter and change, and they can do whatever they want. They can gear it for more power or for more fuel economy. There's a lot you can do there. So it really boils down to what you desire. But yes, I'm not surprised that, yes, your fuel mileage is better, but you lost a little power. It's kind of, physics is like that. There's always give and take. So if you take something away, then you've got to, well, if you want something more here, you've got to take something away from somewhere else. There's always this balance that's going on that you try to maintain between economy and power in a passenger vehicle, or in your case, a truck. So I hope that long-winded explanation answers your question. So yes, it can change those things. Christopher Senes, hey Eric, big fan. I have a 2004 Honda Civic Coupe that has bumpy shifting and struggles to pick up speed after I let go of the brake and press on the gas to speed up. I've changed the transmission fluid 2 times. I also replaced the spark plugs, and I changed the coolant. I also checked the spark plug coils by disconnecting each one to see if they would affect the idle. They all cause the idle to drop. I still feel the bumpy shifting and the car still struggles to pick up speed. I noticed that when I first bought the car, the temperature gauge measured about 1/4 of the way up. After I changed the motor mounts, it was at the halfway mark. I recently noticed that one tire is smaller than the other 3. The first number of the tire is 195 instead of 185 like the other 3. I also noticed that when I turn the lights on at idle, it seems to raise as opposed to the idle dropping when the lights are off, shaking. What do you recommend for me to do? That's a lot, Christopher. Okay, based on your description of the performance issue that you have there, you may be on the right track as far as it possibly being a transmission issue. Really difficult for me to say without digging further, but it sounds like you've done your due diligence as far as looking for an engine performance issue outside of a possible exhaust restriction. An exhaust restriction can cause your engine to be sluggish and your throttle response to not be so good. You don't run so well if you've been constipated for a few days. Same kind of thing with the car. If you can't get rid of the exhaust, it really can't take in more air, and it robs the engine of power. So, and sometimes poorly performing engines or engines that may be burning excessive amounts of oil, things like that, what they can do is they can clog up a catalytic converter and cause an issue there. That's a possibility. And I'm not saying go directly for this, but you can test for this with a vacuum gauge. In fact, I've done a video about how to check for exhaust restrictions. It's a really simple test. You just got to find an intake vacuum source and your vacuum gauge. You run the engine at about 2,500 RPMs and observe the needle on the vacuum gauge. If there is an exhaust restriction, and I'm not saying it's the catalytic converter, it's a good possibility, but if there is an exhaust restriction, what happens is that needle will, over time, after you're holding it at that 2,500 RPM, the needle should remain steady. But if it starts dropping off and you start losing vacuum, then that's a pretty good indication that you have some form of exhaust restriction. So that might be something you might want to check for. As far as the coolant temperature, not real sure. I mean, you changed motor mounts, so maybe you disconnected a wire, maybe you hit a connector. Hard to say. It doesn't sound like you were into the coolant, but that's a tough one there as far as what's going on with your temperature gauge. I don't know if it's faulty readings on your gauge or if it's an actual coolant temperature problem. You're not mentioning anything about overheating. The tires. Now, this can also contribute to your transmission problem. If those different size tires are on the front wheels, what that does is it basically makes the differential work super hard. So one tire is bigger than the other, and what that causes is it causes the final drive inside the transmission to sort of overheat in a sense, or work harder than it needs to, which could in turn cause a transmission problem. So if nothing else, make sure that both tires on the front wheels are the same. If they're not, this could help contribute to a transmission problem because it can wreak all kinds of havoc there. So you want to make sure that all 4 tires are the same size. So you definitely should take that into account and address that. But I think the elephant in the room here is going to be a possible transmission issue. Rotating the tires, I'm not sure if that will help. Also, coolant temperature will affect shift points and how the engine performs and how the transmission shifts. So like I was sort of grappling with when I first read your question, there's kind of a lot going on here. And it's hard to say exactly what is contributing. It's probably a multitude of things that are coming together to cause the issues that you're having. One thing at a time is the best way to deal with that. And you might start with checking for that exhaust restriction and rotating those tires so that you have both the same tires in the front. But really, you should make it so that you have all 4 the same. But if nothing else, make sure the front ones are. All right, Baltimore, Maryland. What kind of name is that? One that I can pronounce. 04 CRV, growl when turning left, almost as if something is dry. Person I bought it from took the rack for overhaul. Same issue. Please help, please. Okay, real common problem with turns on these Hondas, not just CRVs, but also elements like mine, is if the differential fluid, the rear differential fluid, does not get changed, it will make noise on turns. And that's actually a super common thing. It's a well-known, well-documented kind of deal. There's a special fluid, I think for yours. My 04 Element takes a special fluid. It's called Honda double pump fluid. Some of the later models, I think they switched to just Honda ATF, but it is extremely important that you use the correct fluid. That differential works on the type of fluid that's in it. If it doesn't have the correct fluid in it, it won't work properly. And unfortunately, in this case, I know it's expensive to go to Honda and buy the stuff. You can probably find it online cheaper or whatever. But this case, I have to tell you, use the Honda fluids. But that's where I would go first before going for a power steering rack. And as far as an overhaul of power steering racks, I don't know of anybody that really does that. Changing them out is one thing with a remanufactured unit, but I don't know too many people that are rebuilding power steering racks these days. But for you, I would say change the rear differential fluid. Just so happens, I did a video on my Element, which is exactly the same as your CRV. Links will be posted to that in the description when it's all over here. So check there, see what you got. Jordan Petty. All right, Eric, I have a 1990 Toyota Camry DX. On the dash to the right of the steering column, there's a thing that shows me which gear I'm in. It has each gear listed and lights up when I'm in that gear. My problem is that when I'm in drive or neutral, neither of these lights up. I've opened up the shifter and did not see anything or detect the gear in there. I suspect the wiring in the dash is starting to go bad. I've had this car for a few years, and neutral used to light up every time, and drive would sometimes light up. Now nothing from either. The rest of the gears work every time. What are your thoughts? Okay, Jordan, and I also see you did several questions here, and I'm going to answer this one. And if I have time, I'll come back to your other ones. But as far as this one, the rule of KISS applies. Keep it simple, stupid. If a light's not working, first thing to check is the bulb. And in your case, it's quite possible, especially drive. The D light's going to burn out before any of them because that's the one that the vehicle is usually in the most. Sometimes the switch that accompanies the different lights on the dash, that can come out of adjustment. This happens on Hondas from time to time, and just a little slight adjustment can help bring everything into line. But the fact that you just have 2 that aren't working says to me most likely cause bad bulbs inside the instrument cluster. That's where I'd go with that one. So keep it simple, stupid. Rule of KISS. Don't overthink things. Don't overcomplicate things. Just look at the stuff that's right in front of you. It's sometimes amazing how so many problems are really just easy solutions and relatively easy to find. So try to keep that in mind. Once again, I see that you've posted several questions here, but I'm going to try to get to as many people here today as I can. Andrew Smith. Hi there, Eric. I have an 07 Chrysler Town & Country van. Recently, it has started making a high-pitched whining noise. This usually happens after the van has been running for a while. I also noticed when applying pressure on the gas pedal, the whining noise gets louder. I am thinking maybe related to a power steering issue. If this is in fact a power steering issue, could this mean the power steering rack is possibly getting ready to go out? Or could it mean something else? I'm not sure what this whining noise would indicate. Any suggestions you have would be greatly appreciated. Andrew, I actually did a video on finding engine noises like this that I'm going to post a link to in the description. And the long and the short of it is, if you suspect if you have a noise coming from the engine and it's rotational and corresponds with engine speed. Accessories, meaning alternator, power steering, air conditioning, maybe an air pump, something that the engine spins, could possibly be at fault. Idler pulleys also are suspect as well. What you do is a process of elimination. I'm going to assume that you just have one belt that goes around everything, which makes this a little more difficult, but remove that belt and start the engine. It will run fine without all that stuff spinning, at least for a little while. Start it up and see if that noise goes away. If that noise goes away when you start the engine up and there's no accessories or anything turning at that time, then you can reasonably assume that one of those things that the engine is spinning is at fault. After that, I go around individually to each of those pulleys and rotate them by hand. Feel for roughness, listen for that noise, and just try to find someplace. And bearings and idler pulleys, really big for this kind of thing. So you don't have to assume it's power steering. It could just very easily be an idler or a tensioner, something of that type. So that's what I would recommend you do. Remove the serpentine belt, start the engine. The noise isn't there. You know it's something that the engine is spinning. Turn the engine off, spin everything by hand, and see if you can track it down that way. Here we go. Earl V has a 2004 Crown Victoria. The parking brake linings fell off the shoes. I want to replace the parking brake shoes, but I'm getting conflicting stories on how to do this. First one is that I have to open the rear end and remove the locking pin and pull the axles in order to remove the shoes. The second person told me that the park brake shoes will slip out between the backing plate and the back of the axle without any problem. What is your experience with this? Experience varies with this, but I think on this model, you don't have to remove the axles to do it. If you notice, there's holes in that flange between the studs, and you can rotate those holes around to get access to the hold down springs for the parking brake shoes. That's what I would use in order to do that. I would try to slide it out. I wouldn't go for the differential and all that stuff. Although, you know, it's a 2004, probably not a bad idea to change the differential fluid, just saying. And normally what you need to do that is probably remove that rear cover and drain that fluid out and everything from there. But I don't really think you have to. I think you can actually gain access to those retaining springs through the access holes inside the axle flange. So that's where I would go first with that. I would try to make it simple. I would try to make it easy to go there. And good luck with that, by the way. And okay. I was going to say, try to follow up, but I don't know if I'll be able to catch your comment here in the future. Moving on, we have Stepjan Dopar. Hey, Eric, love your shows. Keep saving for that Fairmount project. I can't wait for you to start working on that thing. Now, my question, 2007 Alfa Romero 1.9 JTDM V8 diesel with 53,000 miles. When the car is cold, upon first startup, I can hear the dual mass flywheel clapping. When I go for a drive after 5 to 10 minutes, when everything warms up, the noise disappears completely. Any thoughts? Also, what do you think of these V8, of these 8-valve direct injection turbo diesel engines? Oh, maybe I didn't get that. It's not a V8, it's an 8V. So it's 8-valve diesel injection engine. I get it. So I'm assuming it's a 4-cylinder or something like that. I'm not familiar with the engine. So if you're asking me about my experience with them, I don't have it. And here in Croatia, we have examples with over 600,000 miles. Hello, Croatia. Okay, if you, it's hard to say. You know, it's pretty specific that you're saying that you suspect it's the dual mass flywheel making that noise. And the way I would try to determine that is pressing the clutch and releasing the clutch and seeing if the noise altered. If it did, and you were suspecting that it was a flywheel issue, then it's time to take the transmission out and inspect that flywheel, I would think. That's where I would go with that. But there are all kinds of other noises. But as far as diesel engines, well-maintained diesel engines can last a really long time. They're very simplistic, very nice engines. And in fact, I hope to get one into the shop at some point. Actually, I hope to get one of my own at some point to drive around and play with and make some videos with. I'd love to do some diesel videos. As far as the Fairmount project, I am so ready. I really want to be doing something different right now. The Fairmont's at the top of my list, so trust me, I'm doing everything possible. In fact, today I was trolling Craigslist for donor cars. In fact, I know all of them in the surrounding tri-state area presently. Okay, moving on to actually answering your questions. Okay, We have Iswabi, Imswabi Kevin. Once again, I apologize for messing up your names. My 2005 Ford F-150 truck rattles on startup and has a rough idle but no fall code. What could be the cause? Okay, rattles on startup usually mean like loose parts, loose engine parts, and oil is not getting to them, or the oil hasn't heated up, or possibly the wrong viscosity oil is being used. If you use a thicker viscosity, particularly on startup, a thicker viscosity than what's called for by the manufacturer. Always stick with what the manufacturer recommends. I get this from oil engineers, everything else, also personal experience. However, engines wear out, and you sort of decide what to do from there. And I'm not going to get into a protracted discussion about that. However, the first thing I would do is make sure you're using the correct oil. Second thing, it may be, like I say, worn internals. And as far as worn internal parts, you kind of have to look at the whole vehicle and say to yourself, is it worth pursuing? If the rest of the vehicle is in rough shape and looking like maybe it's on its way out or having issues, well, then drive it. Maybe put the thicker oil in it. With an engine like that, yeah, put the thicker oil in. So what? Now, when it warms up, it's fine. And maybe years and years before it becomes an actual mechanical problem, anything beyond what just the noise is. So long as you aren't really hard on it, it's the hope is that it lasts as long as you need it to last. But there comes a point with a vehicle where you have to really decide, is it worth investing into? And if you're into it and you want to go in there, tear apart the engine, redo it, or get a remanufactured engine and put it in, if you're down with that, go for it. However, if you take a look at it realistically and you say to yourself, well, excuse me, I could get a car payment or find another truck or something else that might work better for me and my needs, that's a question you need to ask yourself at that point. But as far as the noise with no fault code, I'm thinking maybe it's something loose inside the engine, or perhaps not using the correct oil. So I hope that helps. I'm going to be posting a link in the description to an entire article that I wrote about noises and how to deal with them, and I do cover engine noises. Shelton Williams, Eric, I just bought a 1993 Nissan Sentra XE with a 1.6 engine. From my research, I've found it may be my crankshaft seal that is causing oil to leak onto the belts and sling oil onto my alternator, AC, power steering pump, etc. From what I can come up with, there's no way around removing the engine to change this. I hope you can tell me otherwise. If it was to be changed with the engine out, maybe you could recommend something like stop leak fluid, such as Lucas or something. I got a good deal on the car and would like to keep it that way. It's not pouring oil, but it's a steady drip while the engine is hot. I realize the best thing to do is to change the seal and not try to put a Band-Aid on it, but I imagine a shop would want $500 to $1,000 for this job. Hopefully I'm wrong. Shelton, I'm trying to think. I believe that engine has a chain, it's a chain-driven mechanism on the front. And I think one of the reasons why people are saying that you need to remove the engine in order to replace that seal, and memory's fuzzy here, but on some of these, it's very difficult to try to remove the timing cover from the front of the engine with the engine in the car. And I think some of them did require you to do that because the crankshaft seal was installed from the back of that cover. However, like I said, I'm a little fuzzy on it. I did do a little bit of research on the internet before answering this question, and it almost looked to me like the seal went in from the front. And if that's the case, it's really just a matter of removing the crankshaft damper and popping the old seal out and putting a new one in. I wish I could give you a more definitive answer on that, but since I don't know for sure, I'm not going to say. But as far as a quote-unquote Band-Aid, high mileage oil is what I would try. High mileage oils have seal conditioners in them to sort of bring back life into these old seals. What happens over time on some seals is they start out rubber and pliable, but over a period of time, they go through heat cycles, they get hard and a little bit brittle, and therefore they don't seal as well. So they need to be rubbery. Also on crankshaft seals, what you'll find is the actual rubber seal rubs a groove into the crankshaft itself. In fact, one practice that I do with rear main seals and front seals, oftentimes, when I install them, I try to install them in a slightly more recessed position or just in a different position than they were originally. And the reason for this is, like I said, a lot of times there'll be a groove in the crankshaft as a result of just constantly spinning up against the seal. And that may help it seal better, at least in my mind. That's how I felt about it. So I would try the high mileage oil. Perhaps that can help condition that seal, maybe slow the leak, something like that. It'll take a little bit. It's not going to be, you change the oil and a week later it's all gone. It might take a little bit, might slow down a little bit more, and it might get better. But I would continue to research that and actually look up. I just looked really quick before the show to see if there was a picture of it, and it looked to me like it went in from the front. And if it does come in from the front, like I said, it's really a matter of getting that crank pulley off, which may not be an easy task. In fact, what you might have to do is you might have to loosen the engine mount and drop the engine down a bit so that you can actually remove it. That may be another reason that they're suggesting that you need to remove the engine in order to replace that seal. I wish you luck with that, and I wish I had more information for you. I apologize for not having that at this time, but I did try. Okay, we still got some time here. Tyler Chamberlain has a 1999 Toyota Camry 2.2 liter i4, seems to run cold all the time. Replace thermostat with a confirmed working one that's OEM. Coolant temperature sensor is working properly as well. 70% of the radiator is blocked with cardboard and still runs around 150-ish according to car's computer. Fans work normal as well. Turn on at 2:05. A friend has the same car and it runs fine with no problems. First of all, get the cardboard from out front of the engine. Just don't do that. You're not a diesel truck. I don't care how cold it is. The engineers did not design their cooling system to run with chunks of cardboard in front of the radiator and condenser. Just get rid of that stuff. It's not necessary. And in fact, it will affect the operation of the cooling system. And since you're talking about the cooling system being affected, well, here you go. I'm assuming that it wasn't a new thermostat that you put in. And if it wasn't a new thermostat that you put in, this could also be contributing. So you have to make sure that, confirmed working to me says that's a used part. And a used part is always suspect, especially if you're trying to address something. So try a new part. And if you have to go aftermarket, fine, go aftermarket. I recommend like a Beck Army thermostat, something like that. Something of a good name brand is what I would recommend for that. So start with that, get rid of the cardboard. Also, bleed the air out of the cooling system. There'll be a link in the description to a video about that. So many times, so many cooling system problems caused by air in the cooling system. Super imperative, especially if you just change the thermostat out, that you bleed the air out of the system. On every video I've done that involves opening a cooling system, I show this at the end of the video. There's a reason for it. It's super important. So try those things and see what you can get from there. Adam Ridley, I try to keep these to automotive questions. Questions like that are probably best over at the forum. Sarah P, hi, I have a 1997 Honda Odyssey. I'm having a problem with the key not wanting to turn in the ignition. I'm pretty sure it's a problem with the steering lock because I will eventually turn if I find the magic position with my steering wheel. I'm not parking at an angle, putting pressure on the wheel or anything unusual to lock the wheel. It's an intermittent problem, but it's getting worse and taking longer to get it to turn. Is there an easy fix for this? There may be an easy fix for this, but in actuality, I believe the Hondas of that vintage did have an issue with the lock cylinders, and I believe there may have been a recall on those. Yours, it may fall under that. So what I'd recommend you do is call your Honda dealer, have your VIN number handy, and give them your VIN number and find out if there is the ignition lock update, because we had to remove the tumblers is what you're talking about, and do an update to those and put everything back together. So that's a possibility. Another possibility that I've seen on some Honda ignition switches is that the fasteners that hold them to the steering column may work their way loose. If they do, then the lock cylinder sort of moves around a bit. And if that's the case, then you may get this intermittent problem that you're having. This is the tricky part. You have to remove the plastic covers over the steering column, and you'll note that there's sort of like a little strap over the top of the steering column and two what look like bolt heads but aren't bolts that are there holding the ignition lock cylinder on. So try to move it up and down, and if you can see movement there, then it is loose. To tighten it, those are actually breakaway bolts. They start out with bolt heads. You'll see in the center of that, those two little fasteners on the side, you'll see in the center, it looks like something was broken away, and it was, because they're bolts that are designed to break away. It's part of an anti-theft thing. So what I do to tighten these bolts is I'll take a center punch and a hammer, and I'll just, similar to removing rusty fasteners. I've done a video on that. So instead of trying to loosen, I will try to tighten with, like I say, a long punch. I'll start hammering it till it digs into the fastener, and then I'll angle it so that I can get it so that it starts to tighten. Just keep tapping it with a hammer to get that to happen. So that's what I would check for. I would check to see if the lock, well, first thing I would do is I'd call Honda with the VIN number. And once you've done that, see if they've got a recall on it. If they do, even though it's a 97, it was a recall, it's covered, that kind of thing. You take it in, they take care of you. Honda's really good about this. In fact, I just recently had a seatbelt replaced in my 2001 Odyssey because of this. So check that out first, and then check to see if it's loose. And then if you still have an issue after that, maybe time to get a locksmith in there, or to replace that assembly, because the tumblers on the inside of the lock assembly itself may be falling apart. Kind of sucks. You may have to get a different key. But at the end of the day, a locksmith can actually make it work with your original key, but yeah, that can sometimes be a pain. I'll answer one more. No, that one was a long one. Here's a easy one. Scott Duty. Hey, Eric, I have a 2003 Honda Odyssey. Odyssey questions abound. With 226,000 miles, the engine is using about a quart of oil every 4,000 miles. I'm using full synthetic oil, AMSOIL. There are no oil drips under the vehicle. I also have done an inspection all over the engine block and have not found any leaks. Is it normal for a vehicle with this high mileage to use oil at this rate? What would cause the engine that's not visibly leaking oil to burn oil? Do you need to be concerned about internal engine part failing? Thanks for your videos. You saved me a ton of money. Thank you, Scott, for that comment. Okay. Yes and yes. It's probably burning the oil internally. That's a lot of miles. Parts wear out at that time. But more importantly, it really depends on how the engine was maintained up to that point. Engines that get infrequent oil changes, sometimes what happens is there's 3 sets of rings on a piston. There's 2 compression rings, and below that, there's a set of oil control rings. Behind those oil control rings, there are holes inside the piston. What those oil control rings do is there's lubrication that comes up from underneath the crankcase that lubricates the cylinder walls. And as the piston moves up and down, those oil control rings help scrape that excess oil off of the inside of the cylinder walls and channel it back through those holes, back through the backside of the piston and down into the engine. If these holes get clogged, Toyotas are kind of famous for this, actually, of a certain vintage, the 4-cylinders that they had there for a bit. But infrequent oil changes, I see this often, and those oil control rings get gummed up. Those holes in the backs of the pistons get gummed up, and they won't allow that oil to go back down through the piston and back down to the crankcase. As a result, that oil goes past the compression rings, get burned inside of the combustion chamber, and away you go. This problem really can only be fixed by tearing the engine down or replacing it. Given that you have that many miles on it, that may be what you're looking at. Once again, as I mentioned earlier about the person with the truck with the rattle noise from the start up, you're looking at the same thing. You need to take a good look at your Odyssey and say, is it worth it? And if it's not worth it, yeah. As far as things you could possibly put in there to deal with, like gummed up oil control rings, there's products out there that you can use, but here's a little trick. Try a quart of transmission fluid, automatic transmission fluid, when you change your oil. Automatic transmission fluid is made from crude oil. The reason it's red is because they dye it that way. In fact, the reason why oil looks the way it does is because of the additives they put into it. But that being said, it's oil. But the detergent package inside of automatic transmission fluid is different than the detergent package in motor oil. And an old trick on older vehicles was to try to run a quart of transmission fluid in there. It can sometimes clean up situations like this. Not saying it's going to be, the do-all end-all. Also, earlier, first question I answered was about a PCV valve that was malfunctioning. With as many miles as you've got on yours, might be worth looking into. I'd recommend a Honda PCV valve if you're going to replace it, but throw a new PCV valve on there, see if that helps. So there are several ways to go about this, but once again, if you get to that point and you've tried all the easy stuff, take a look at the whole vehicle. Do you need brakes? Is your transmission having an issue? Those Odysseys are known for transmission problems. I'm actually fairly certain you might have had one replaced already, at least one. So, take a look at all those things, decide if it's really worth it, and then take it from there. Anyway, I think we've reached the end of our fun today. But I've tried to answer as many of your questions as I can. I've tried to not be so long-winded, that type of thing. Once again, the next show will be on March 4th. So if I didn't get to your question today, I usually start posting. Well, I post the event about a week before I actually do the show. usually on the Friday beforehand, and you can start posting your questions up through there. Once again, EricTheCarGuy.com is always available to you. There will be additional information in the description of this video, so please check there if you have additional questions or looking for additional information. And lastly, I have sort of a special announcement, and I'm sort of hinting, and I'm going to tease you a bit. Tomorrow is a huge day for Eric the Car Guy. I feel like a kid on Christmas Eve right now. I'm not going to tell you what, but after tomorrow, Eric the Car Guy will be this will be before and after Eric the Car Guy. It's like BC and AD kind of thing that's happening tomorrow. So be on the lookout on my social networks. I may leak out a little bit tomorrow, so keep an eye out there. Throwing that little teaser out there for you. But right now, I'm going to close this show down, and I will see you in 2 weeks. Outside of that, as always, be safe, have fun, stay dirty, and thanks for watching. See you later.